What's happening? Welcome back to the Slapstream with Djordje, live from Slapsville. I know it's been a bit since I posted and did one of these slap streams, but I'm still around. It's really hard to schedule a guest. Sometimes I'm busy. Sometimes things are go crazy. World is going crazy like these days, but we don't talk about it on the slap stream. And but here we are. Here's the 70th episode of the slap stream, and I'm super stoked I've been able to do this for such a long time. Um, Before we start, before I introduce my guest, I would like to thank you for subscribing. Thanks a lot for checking out the Patreon. If you haven't checked out the Patreon, make sure to do that. That's the way how I'm able to continue doing these fun videos, slap stream videos, and all kinds of other stuff. And I offer quite a bit of perks over there. So you should check it out. The link is in the description of this video. If you haven't followed me, if you haven't followed the Art of Slap Bass, make sure to do that. All these links are in the description of this video. Um, Recently, like 2 weeks ago or so, like I went to Nashville. I had a blast. I was going out, seen some amazing shows, amazing slap bass players, Joe Fick being one of them, and I really had a blast. I love Nashville, and I used this chance like to meet a guy in person that I've been in touch with for a long time via internet, and we share a mutual love for amazing bass player, and by my opinion one of the best slap bass players in the history of slap bass, Joe Zinken. And he owns his bass as well, so I figured out, I have to try to play this bass. I really wanted to meet him and talk and learn more about Joe. And we had a blast. We talked a lot, like hours and hours. And then I figured, it's this is ready for the slap stream. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my today's guest, and that's Kent Blanton. Hey, Kent.
Hey, George, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
It was great seeing you in Nashville, and great talking to you about Joe, about bass, like for all these years, and especially now in Nashville. And then we figured out all these stories, including your story, including your career. These are ready for the slap stream, so I'm pretty excited about this. And thanks
Yeah,
for
yeah.
deciding to be a part of the slap stream. 70th
Thank-
episode about slap bass. Can you believe
That's
that?
that's a lot of them. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I would like to start with the beginning. How did you get interested in music? How did you decide to play upright bass? Do you play any other instruments?
Well, I guess I started probably when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I played, learned to play the guitar and the banjo, kind of bluegrass stuff. Um, my introduction to the bass was in seventh grade of middle school, or we called it junior high. I had been playing drums in elementary school in the school band, and I came to the high school, which was a 7th through 12th grade school. And in the band room, up on the one of the shelves in there was an upright bass, an old Epiphone upright. Some of the strings were broke on it, and I don't know. I just always kind of been drawn to the upright. I wanted to, just see what it's about. So I asked the band director. I said, "Hey, man, what about that old bass in there? Is there any possibility I could, get that thing down, play with it, and mess with it?" And he's like, and he took me up because he had been a bass and a tuba player in his college career and such. And so, yeah, he said, yeah, get it down. We got a couple strings for it. Of course, he handed me a book with notation and a bow with, twinkle, twinkle, little star, all this stuff. And, you know, I, I looked at that for a little bit. And then by the end of the year, you could check instruments out and take them home with you. So I got to take the bass home with me over the summer. And, within a week or so, I was at the local country jam session up the road with a bass, learning to play country bass, not Twinkle Little Star with the bow. I was kind of just thrown into the fire. Um, I do have to add, um, my grandmother had taught me just a little bit of chords on the piano, so I could play the chords and the bass notes that went with the chords. So that too also gave me a little bit of understanding of what notes go with which chords. That had helped me. Um, but yeah, that's how I got started, was in school, and about 2 years with that band director, and then I was introduced to we had a new band director who happened to be Walter King, who's BB King's nephew, and he was a real cool jazz guy. He arranged, played horns on lots of sessions here in Nashville, arranged for the Tonight Show with Doc Severinsen, and needless to say, we had a uh, real good jazz band. After that, we uh, we Walter really whipped us into shape on the jazz side. I learned to read just a little bit. I cheated through most of my notation reading. I'd memorize it instead of sit there and sight read. But anyway, and that was in my introduction into jazz and big band, swing. I really got into that. Got into a lot of kind of weird stuff. 20s, well, I guess what you call jug band music, and 20s and 30s uh, swing. That's kind of something I've always liked. That's not a lot of out there. I've never had a chance to play much of it, but that's also where, one of the places I learned, started hearing slap bass. But
Oh yeah, that's that period. I guess like 20s and 30s was very important for the slap bass, and some of the
mhm.
most amazing slappers were playing back in those days. So upright bass was practically your first instrument.
Well, I played the banjo some and the guitar.
Okay.
So it kind of came out of necessity when I started playing the bass. Uh, there were a lot of banjo players, a lot of guitar players around, but there wasn't
Hmm.
that many bass players, especially when I was a teenager, young teenager, and I
Eh,
just kind of put those aside, and I could find more places to play. I really first started playing at a little jam session of old country players. They really weren't bluegrass players, but these were old guys that had been on the Grand Ole Opry back in the 40s and the 50s. One of them was Buford Gentry, who played steel guitar for Hank Snow. Uh, these old guys just
Awesome.
got together and played old two-beat country music. Really not that much shuffle beat like Ray Price. I'm talking about like Webb Pierce stuff way back there. And Buford was the first person that he showed me a lot about walking the bass and how to go from how to walk the lines and things like that. Buford, being a steel player, of course, he knew all that stuff. But
So would you say that knowing to play like banjo before, I mean, and guitar like before the starting on the bass, did that help you at all, or
yeah, I'd
not?
say a little bit, and it kind of opened the door really for me, a place to get out and learn to play, because I had been playing the banjo some and the guitar at these little jam sessions around, and then we had, back those days, we had several, we call them music barns, or just local jam sessions where people would get together and play, mostly bluegrass, but I learned a whole lot, just out in the parking lot playing with these guys, but some of my first real education into uh, more complicated playing was with those old country guys, because we were playing more than three chord songs, and that was that, and then also diving into learning to play jazz, and a little bit, and my appreciation for jazz that the band director brought to us, Walter King. Uh, that kind of, it broadened my horizons more than a three chord bluegrass song would have been done at the time.
I would say that like playing jazz or at least learning to play jazz is very important for upright bass player. I mean, any other
Hmm.
any musician, but it seems like especially for us. Um,
Hmm.
did you so? Did you say that you have had like a formal education at the school where you picked the bass? Formal music
Well,
education or not so much?
well, you know, I would learn some jazz lines a little bit. As far as my sight reading was pretty pitiful. I could read notation as far, I played drums in marching band and things, and I could read rhythmic patterns, but most of the reading I would do, I would memorize it. I couldn't sit there. You couldn't throw a new piece of music up there and tell me to play it. I'd have to I'd have to go home and pick it out. I was not a real good sight read student. I never sat down and learned it, which I wished I had. Now I wished I had sat down and really learned to sight read. But yeah, I kind of faked my way through a lot of that. But
It seems that in this scene, like the root scene, like lots of people are not that great at sight reading, but can
mhm.
still play amazing. So that's the most important. When did you have your first band, and do you remember the name for that one?
Probably my first um, introduction into professional, I guess you'd say, making money. Besides just locally, I worked with a fellow named Lonnie Jones. He used to help a lot of younger guys get together. He worked younger people. Bluegrass act. We would play campground down toward Opryland, which used to be our big tourist attraction. And that he really helped a lot of people. Myself and Leroy Troy, who was on the Marty Stuart show. Everybody knows Leroy. We grew up together, and Lonnie gave us our first chance of making a little money. Doing something fun. And then probably, yeah, I was still in high school. I started working with a band called New Tradition, playing bluegrass, and that was my first dive into making some decent money, going out a little bit on the road. Um, that was in the late '80s, 86, 87, somewhere along there.
And from there, like I know that you played with some really interesting and amazing people. So how did you get to all of those? And all of the actually before I answer that, like all of this was happening in Nashville, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
were
yeah.
born and
I was
raised in
I
Nashville?
was born. I'm a real rare being at this time, a native Nashvilleian. I was born and raised here, and yeah, around Nashville, and I started, like I said, the late '80s, a little bit of touring, into the '90s. I worked with Larry Cordell and Glenn Duncan. They were a bluegrass act out on the circuit. I did that a few years, and then by the early mid '90s, I quit for a long time. I got out of music. I was working with our family had a business at the time, and stayed tremendously busy with that. I really didn't have time to play any,
Hmm.
and got out of it until about 1997, 98. At that time, and I started playing again. In '98 is when I started working some downtown Nashville. That's when Broadway was really starting to, the honky tonks and Broadway were really starting to, um, really gain some momentum down there. And
Late 90s?
late '90s, yeah. That's it. I worked Robert. Uh, Kind of, I guess it's about the time, when BR 549, those guys were down there, and I worked with, golly, I can't even remember some of the guys. You just get calls every once in a while. Hey man, we got a 10 to 2, or a 6 to 10. You want? Yeah, I'll go work it. And that time, we just showed up and played country music. There wasn't Nobody had as of now, you have to have an iPad with full of charts and all this thing. There was none of that. You had to, somebody called a song. If you didn't know the kickoff, you'd look at, hey, what's a kickoff? And somebody, 45-11. They throw you some numbers, and here we go in the key. And it was a fun time back there. Working Roberts, Legends Corner, the Stage, Wolfie's. There used to be the old Bluegrass Inn that was there on Broadway. They called it then. And then, of course, the Station Inn. I had worked since I was probably, I think, 16 the first time I worked the Station Inn. And the Station Inn has always had a Sunday night jam session. And that was always fun, just bluegrass jam session, real low key back then. Now it's full of an audience and they're watching it. Back then it was just musicians hanging out playing. But
Nice.
But yeah, the late 90s when Broadway really opened up, and that's when I started playing downtown. I started working some with John Hartford and his string band. About the same time, I worked with Marty Stuart. I got involved with Marty Stuart. Marty had let his road band go. They had left the road, and he had just pick up just different people at times to play. I worked some with Richard Bennett, the great producer. We worked on 2 or 3 movie soundtracks at that time. Time I was working with Marty, I was working some, let's see, I'm trying to think who else that time. I get to trying to think. I guess it was around 2000. I started working some with Dierks Bentley. Dierks had moved here to Nashville, of all things, to go to law school at Vanderbilt. And myself and Dierks' cousin, Avery Auger, he had got me. We just worked little bluegrass gigs around town, and I guess Avery knew that I like playing country too, and he hit me up. He said, "Hey, my cousin Dierks," which I knew Dierks. They lived together over in the house, and he said, "My cousin Dierks wants to book a club one night and play country. You want to come play country with him?" I'm like, yeah, I'll go play with him. So the first night Dierks ever booked an act, led a band, was at this little dive bar down near Centennial Park in Nashville called the Spring Water, and it was coming a thunderstorm that night, and the Spring Water was a good name for it because the water was coming through the roof on the stage. It was, I mean, you can't make this kind of stuff up. But anyway, I started working with Dierks then. Gosh, we did a 1.5 years gig up on 2nd Avenue at a brew house. Had some pretty interesting days down there, and he moved on up to Broadway, kind of climbed the Broadway ladder, so to speak, into different venues up there. I think we opened for Asleep at the Wheel one time or something at the Exit Inn, and I did just a handful of road dates with Dierks while playing the clubs, and finally he landed his big publishing deal and then his recording deal, and I didn't want to go on the road doing that. But Dierks and I are still good friends. I hadn't seen him in a long time. I used to bump into him at the Opry, and but at the same time I was working some with Marty. I was doing Hartford's stuff. I worked 2 years with Jimmy Martin, the Bluegrass King. Rhonda Vincent, nice. did a little bit with Rhonda. Doing some recording sessions. I started into getting a little bit of session work around town. And, at that time, the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot of upright players in Nashville. You would go down through Broadway and see, it was nothing short to see 3 or 4 different clubs with upright players. There was a lot of country and rockabilly and some bluegrass all up and down Nashville. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into into
Was it?
playing.
I know that you played with Ricky Skaggs as well. Was it at that time period?
Yeah, a little later, I started subbing with Ricky uh, just a few years. That's Marty there in that picture. There's one me and
All right,
Ricky.
I got it.
Yeah, I worked Ricky. I don't know where me and Ricky first met. Um, I guess it was about in that same time. Bashful Brother Oswald, who was the great dobro player with Roy Acuff's band. Oz used to have pickings at his house on Sunday afternoons,
Hmm,
and he would have
nice.
everybody there from Ricky to Marty to Vince Gill, and all these names would drop by. It was a pretty big deal to get asked to come to one of Brother Oz's parties. We'd sit around and play. Mac Wiseman, that's where I got to know Mac Wiseman. Did a couple records for Mac, and I guess that's where I got my introduction to Ricky. And then occasionally Ricky would have. I did a few road dates with Ricky. Um, I got to and then come do the Opry with him some. I was working at the Opry at that time with Marty, and then later with Jesse McReynolds. I was with Jesse for 4 or 5 years around the Opry, and that's at I don't know if that's the Ryman or the big. I think that's the big house, but yeah, that was a fun time. It was a lot of fun getting to
I can
getting to
imagine.
meet those guys and play with some of your heroes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know that you have a bass like that you started doing with, I don't know how you call it, like with the skin on the side.
Hmm.
Um, when did you start playing that?
Well, that's what they call the drum attachment.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I saw that when I was in high school when I started playing the bass. I saw those old videos that are all over YouTube now. They call them Grand Ole Opry videos. The color videos are on film. They're real good 35 millimeter film. Um, and I would see that guy in the background, this thing on his bass, and with this snare drum brush, and that caught my interest. Like what in the world's he doing there? And I started, reading about it, and at that time we didn't have no internet and all this. We just had to ask around, find out what it was, and come to find out, Lightning Chance was one of the guys that did that back in the '50s. Lightning lived not 5 minutes from where I grew up, right down the road over in Madison, and that time you call, get the phone book out, call people up, not because I was probably 16 years old, and I called Lightning and said, Lightning, I, told him who I was. I was learning to play the bass, and I said, man, I'd like to come see this drum thing you got going on. And he was so nice to me. Lightning said, he gave me his address, said, you come some afternoon, and I got to go in, and he showed me his drum head and his technique of how he did it. Now, Lightning didn't start that. A fellow named Ernie Newton is the guy that came to Nashville with that. Ernie had worked. He came here in 1949 and worked with Les Paul and Fred Waring, some of those guys in Chicago. But he came here to the Opry in '49, worked with Red Foley and behind just everybody at the Opry once he got here. But Lightning had kind of copied his stuff, and I was real fortunate. Lightning was a super nice guy and gentleman, I should say, and he helped me learn this technique. I had already kind of figured some of that out on my own. I'd made me a little drum head out of, I think I made it out of styrofoam and paper sack of all things. But I had learned, just by watching those TV shows and then hearing also records, that Ernie and Lightning were on. I could pick it out what they were doing, and just kind of taught myself a lot of that. But yeah, the drum attachment, that was
Not many people were using that still, right? I mean, it's a cool
no,
thing, but I
no,
only know about a handful of people, right?
yeah. I mean, when I picked that up, uh, I guess it was me and Lightning were the last two doing that, and
Okay.
I think maybe seeing it once the internet started and you started seeing videos and things. I think that kind of picked up steam of what it was. Nobody knew what this thing was. A lot of people, would even hear on these records. You hear on the Hank Williams record, and they're like, "Oh, there's a snare drum on there." Like, no, it's not a snare drum. It's a snare drum brush, but it's not a snare drum. And
Yeah, yeah.
that was the Opry's answer to snare for drums. They didn't want that drum on there, but and
Oh, interesting.
yeah, they wanted to
Is
keep
that a reason how
everything.
the whole thing started?
Well, it's kind of vague there. I never got to meet Ernie Newton and ask these questions. I think Ernie did that out of necessity. I don't know if Ernie's parents were vaudeville people, so this could have been something that came from vaudeville. I
Hmm.
don't know, but he was doing this with Les Paul and some of those smaller jazz trios where they didn't have a drummer. He could use this stuff, so he brought that to Nashville. A lot of people later say that was the excuse for using drums. I don't think it was. I think it's just something Ernie did, and he started using, and people adapted to it because it added that beat to it, and um, and Ernie was a an educated bass player. He could read music. He played with some of the dance bands here in town and swing bands, and he got a lot of work because he's a good bass player. And Lightning was the same way. Lightning came here. He had worked with big bands in the Navy during World War II, so Lightning could read a little bit, but he was still a hillbilly, So he got his work, playing in the hillbilly bands. But yeah, I've got several of those drum heads. One talking about. I've got one right here. I'll pull it out here and show you.
Yeah, I would love like if you don't mind just showing and
Yeah,
demonstrate how the technique functions and
this one. When I met Lightning, I took his drum head and laid it out and traced it out, and we built one just about exactly like Lightning's. I've had this old drum head for golly, I don't know how long, 30 years now. Let's see if I can get the thing back here where you can see it a little bit. But yeah, this is a. Can you still hear me clearly there?
oh yeah, I hear you perfect.
I'll try to. I'll try to show you. This is how you hold the drum brush. Now the old guys, Lightning, those guys played with their thumb, and they hooked it and did this, and unknowingly, that not knowing that, I learned just to play with my index finger, just like plucking the bass. So I kind of learned a different technique, but everybody's got their own. But yeah, Lightning, those guys, they plucked with their thumb, and you really don't hit the thing. You just stir it, just like a jazz drummer stirs a brush. And so I'll show you a little bit of my technique is with my index finger. But and it sounds a little weird. I don't know where my better brush is. This is one of my spares. But yeah, that's it's just an old trick. And that's kind of how that thing came about. But it was not a a commercial success. I don't think you would say by any means. You didn't see too many other guys.
It's still really cool. I never played it, and I would like to try it one day. And seems I'm not sure if I would use it much, but it's always good to learn new things, and
It,
I love that sound.
it comes handy, when I started doing it with bluegrass bands and things, it kind of added the sound of a snare drum, and a lot of your old bluegrass records back in the 50s. Uh, Ernie Newton played on them because he was a good studio bass player,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, a lot of your bluegrass bands, you might have had a good fiddle player and a good banjo player and a lead instrument, but they usually had kind of a comedian that helped the bass. It wasn't they weren't that good, and so and I back up a little bit. Back in probably 1980, 88 or 89, I got to go out with Bill Monroe and worked a few dates with Bill, just subbing. His bass player
Oh wow, that's so
was
cool.
out, and I took that with me. I put that on my bass and kind of asked Bill, because a lot of his big hits back in the 50s has got that on there, and I was real anxious to ask Bill. Bill was an unusual character, and I said, Bill, was the drum head? I said, on your records, was that something you thought of, or where did you get that idea to use this on your records? Because Ernie Newton was playing it, and he said, oh, that was Owen Bradley. That was Owen Bradley, who was the
Ah,
producer. So
yeah,
Owen
yeah, yeah.
called that, but yeah, and I used it some on stage when I worked with Jimmy Martin. Jimmy loved it because Jimmy had worked with those guys, with Monroe in the 50s, and then some of Jimmy's records has got the drum head on it, and so Jimmy loved it because he likes having snare drum behind his music anyhow. So, and
That's
I've used it with some other guys around town and made records with it, and
that's cool.
and
How much do you use it these days?
not a whole lot, anymore. I don't play just a whole lot anymore, and
Mhm.
there's not a whole lot out there I want to play anymore, to be real frank about it. But but there's one guy that calls me. He cuts some bluegrass stuff like that with triple fiddles, Monroe style. I just
Okay, nice.
recorded some stuff a couple weeks ago with it, but I don't.
Oh, is that a session that you had while I was in Nashville?
Yeah, one of them.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, cool.
yeah. I was finishing up a record. A guy
Nice.
he does bluegrass and a lot of twin fiddle, 50 style bluegrass like that.
Cool.
He likes to use it on there.
Who do you play with these days the most?
Well, right now, probably the most that I'm doing right now, the last few years, none of us have done a whole lot. But my wife is a steel player, and there we go. And we go. She's from East Tennessee, and around Knoxville and East Tennessee, there's still a lot of what we call real country music up there. Uh, and we occasionally go up there and sub when one of the guys that she knew or something, is out of town and different bands. And there's a couple of fellows up there that get gigs and call us to come, and you know, we run up there and play just to get to play some good country music. Because unfortunately around Nashville here, it's just about gone. There's a few gigs around that are kind of sort of country, but as far as the real country music, when you're using a steel guitar and a fiddle and an upright bass and a stick and a brush on a drum set, they're unfortunately Nashville's about void of it anymore. But
Do you think that there are some other towns where it's present more than
I
Nashville?
I think Texas is still full of it.
Okay.
I think there's still plenty of dance. That's the thing around Nashville. We used to have a lot of square dances, they call them, and
Hmm.
hit country bands. And now, it used to be every little town around Nashville had a good Saturday or Friday night square dance, but they're all gone. I don't know. It's just a sign of the times. But that's about all I'm doing. That I'll go sub at the station in for somebody. I've got some friends that we'll put together. Some of my good friends, Charlie Cushman and Mike Webb, who's a dobro player and a good singer, and a boy named Robert Montgomery from down Alabama. We'll throw something together and go work the station in. Now we did have for about almost 10 years, I was involved with a Western swing band here called the Music City Doughboys. And we put one record out. And we may crank them back up here before long. Those guys are all have got road gigs, so they're gone a whole lot. But I think maybe in the future, we're thinking about throwing something back together, working a little bit. But
I hope you'll make that happen. And do you think that you gonna start playing more after this whole pandemic is over?
I'd like to, yeah, I'd like to play some. And I've had a few offers, wanting to go play. I just don't want to go play on the road anymore. I've got a business and children coming up and things, and I don't, and I think that kind of alienates you when you don't want to play the road. People don't want to,
Yeah,
they want
I can
somebody to
see
go
that.
play all the road gigs, and I'm not interested in going out of town.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard to be a musician, but it's hard to be
It
on the
is,
road all the time for sure.
yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about slap. Since this is the slap stream.
Mhm.
So when did you start slapping? Well, how did you discover slap?
I learned a little slap when I first started. Of course, when you first start playing the bass, you see somebody slap it, and you're like, "Oh, what's that?" And there were a couple guys around the bluegrass scene when I was young that made an impression on me, and I learned that. I learned, of course, hearing rockabilly records. My parents had the old LP of "Rock Around the Clock" by Bill Haley and the Comets, and I wore that thing out. Hearing that slap bass on that thing, that was a big influence. Of course, hearing when I got to playing a little jazz and learning, hearing those jazz records from the 20s, that kind of piqued my interest. Of course, back then we had to go find the 78s of those things. You couldn't get on YouTube and listen to them. It was a little more of a chore. But yeah, in high school I learned that, and like I said, a few guys around town, and by hearing records, I know one of the first things I heard country records of something slap was actually it was Bob Moore slapping, and he didn't do a lot of slapping, but he was on a lot of Chet Atkins records, and my parents had some Chet Atkins records. He was I know one of the first ones I ever heard was called Teensville, OLP, and they play some nameless chorus on there. They put a name to, and Bob's on there slapping the bass, and that's what got me, interested in that as well. It kind of comes with the instrument when you're playing bluegrass, and you start digging into what these guys were doing.
So you completely came out of that like a traditional country or bluegrass, a little bit of jazz
Yeah.
style of playing. You were not, and rockabilly, but you were not influenced by any of the rockabilly that was coming. I mean, in the '80s, I guess the Stray Cats and any of those.
Well, when I was in high school in the '80s, and when the Stray Cats came out, now that was a I dove into the Stray Cats. That piqued my interest of
Okay.
playing everybody. They were very popular. Let's see, the Stray Cats, and there's just a handful of them I remember, and I can't even remember. I remember going watching the Planet Rockers.
Mm-hmm.
That was Mark Winchester and
Sonny George.
Sonny George. Yep. And I don't remember the drummer's name, but they were.
Billy Thunder.
No, that don't sound. I've got their CD around here somewhere.
Okay.
I bought a CD from, but I remember that was, golly, that was.
And Eddie Angel on guitar, right?
Eddie Angel. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember that they were out after the the rockabilly craze, and of course I heard most of the rockabilly I heard was Bill Haley or the Elvis stuff, of course, and then
So 50s stuff.
50 stuff. Carl Perkins stuff always piqued my interest. It was a little was a little more country oriented or something. I always liked, and his brother played that more of that straight slap kind of stuff. It always piqued my interest. But yeah, more of the country stuff is where I learned, and like I said, I got to meet Lightning and met some other guys around here, Billy Linneman at the Opry, and those
We're
guys.
gonna talk about that bass night that you organized a little bit, if you don't mind, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
And can you tell me how did that happen?
Well, that leads us into Joe Zinkin, and I had heard Joe's name mentioned when I was in high school and around these older guys, these bass players, and you'd see occasionally you'd get a record or recording that occasionally would have a name, discography, who played what, and so of course I'd met Roy Husky Jr. and around town playing, and got to be friends with Roy, and we talked, about, of course, his dad, Junior Husky, and then names of other bass players. And I was, I've always been an old soul. I'm always into history, and where did this come from, and I want to do things. Even as a kid, I was, they played gut strings. I want to play gut string. Still that way, but. And so I'd heard Joe's name around town, and I got to, digging into learning some things. And Leroy Troy, my good friend, the banjo player, the Sultan of Gulletsville, they call him. He had gotten a Roy Acuff songbook from the mid 1940s when Joe was playing with Acuff. It had a lot of pictures and things in it. And he said, "Man," he said, "it'd be great if we could get Joe to sign this book." And I thought, I'd like to meet Joe. And at the time I was in the musicians union, and I had a musicians union directory that had everybody's phone number and everybody's address. I mean, I could have called Reba McEntire because her name was in there, or Garth, all these people's names. And it was, you didn't go around calling those people, but you had access, except for Joe's. And Joe's address was not in the book, and the phone number that was there was not his phone. You'd call it, and it was somebody else. And I started asking around some people. I said, "What's the deal with Zinkin?" And they said, he got out of the music business and kind of became a recluse. And I thought, well, that's too bad. But then, like I said, then the thing with Troy, when Leroy had that book, and I said, I want to find this guy. If he's still around, let's find him. And I talked to Eddie Stubbs about that time.
And just for a second, these are late 90s or early 2000s?
Late 90s. Yeah, late 90s.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, 90, probably 97, 98. And
all right.
So anyway, so I had a I had a good friend at the time that was a dispatcher at the police department. I know this is probably all as illegal as all get out, but anyway, I called him one night and I said, "Hey man," I said, "I'm trying to find an old friend." I said, "See if you can come up. This is an unusual name. See if you can find an address for me." And I gave him Joe's name, and he punched it up, in the driver's license computer. Like I said, this is really illegal, but at that time it wasn't that big a deal. And Joe being 80 something years old, he said, "Yeah, he is an old friend, isn't he?" I said, "Well, I've never, I didn't tell him exactly what I was doing, but anyway, we got Joe's address, and so me and Leroy just marched up there one day, rode up there, and knocked on the door, and Joe came around from behind the house. He'd been out mowing his grass, and I said, "I'm looking for Joe Zinkin." And he said, "I'm afraid that's me. What have I done now?" He was being comical the whole time, and we showed him, said, we found this book, and we'd like to get you to autograph it. And we stood there in the heat of the afternoon. I think it's in the middle of July, and he sat there and told us stories and looked at that book and just reminisced. And and I got his phone. I don't think I got his phone number then. I went back a time or two more. I would go back, and I got some copies of the Bobby Lord shows that I put up. Back then, that stuff was, the internet was not full of that kind of thing. A friend of mine at TNN, well, it was Dierks. In fact, he worked at the in the film room at TNN at that time. He got me copies of some of those things, and I would make Joe copies and take to him. And he never seen himself back on TV. That stuff was live back then, or ran one time. And Joe had made some movies with Roy Acuff in the '40s, Hollywood movies. I got copies of those, and so that was my introduction to Joe. And I guess it was probably in 98, 99. I think it's 99. I had bought a bass from John Hartford had contact with a fellow named Curly Rhodes. Curly had been a bass player and a comedian here in Nashville, and he had passed away, and his bass was for sale. It was an old flatback bass. I bought it and played it around town some, and I was going near Joe's house one afternoon, had that old bass with me, and I thought, I'm gonna stop in here and show Joe this bass and see what get his reaction. We had become pretty good friends, and I stopped in there and said, Joe, I said, look here at this bass. I went and got it, and he said, oh, that's Curly's bass. I know that. Yeah. He said, hey, let me go get my bass and show you my bass. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah, let's see your bass. And he went and rummaged around in the bedroom and come out with the old German bass that I now have. And man, I hit a string on that thing. He sat there and slapped a little bit for me, and he had about lost his technique. He's pretty old, but he could still hit a lick or two on it. And man, I hit about 2 notes on it. I thought, God, what a bass, man! I've got, this. I believe it's one of the loudest basses I've never had a hold of. And I don't
That's
remember.
so cool. I'm really glad you have that bass, and that you're the one that actually have it. I mean, that thing, should be in a museum or something. I mean,
Yeah,
of the bass players,
yeah,
player museum. I don't know what to say. It's amazing.
yeah,
So cool. Did you ever ask him about his crazy slap technique and
yeah,
everything that he was using during those shows?
yeah. And that's where when I got to know him pretty good and questioned him good, he had started playing when he was 16, 17 years old. He had started working on it with a cowboy trio. He was from Washington County, Indiana. Uh, and he started playing with a cowboy trio when he was in his teens. And they worked river boats up and down the Mississippi River. I think they went from Louisville to New Orleans. And he said that for 2 weeks you would work the boats, and for 2 weeks you would work tent shows at different cities along the river. And the tent shows were advertisements for the riverboat. So you could, you'd see a tent show and they'd advertise to take your riverboat ride. And he learned to slap the bass while exchanging with when you work the tent show in the boat. There was a jazz or Dixieland, I don't know what you'd call it. This would have been in the mid 30s, a jazz band out of New Orleans. And his description was a little black man. He said he was a little short black man that played with the jazz band. And he said that's who showed him how to slap the bass. And he couldn't remember what his name was. He had remembered at one time, and he'd sit there and he said, "Oh, I can't remember his name. I can't remember his name." And we never could pull his name back out. And it could have been Charlie's artist or there's no telling who it was. He thought he was from Paducah, Kentucky, and and I have searched and searched. I've researched a pretty good deal about years ago about, the who any of the bands would have been playing those riverboats, and it was all the guys out of New Orleans were constantly, up and down playing those riverboat gigs. Must have been pretty good. But that's where Joe said he learned to slap the bass, and he had an unusual lick, and that's why I always wanted to learn who he'd learned it from and see if that was the same, if he had the same technique. But
So you did he tell you anything about slap and then his stuff, like the way he was he aware? I mean, I have like so many questions, so sorry, I'm
yeah,
confused. But like, was he aware that he was like extremely good, and then like maybe the best at that time?
uh, you know, Joe was a professional musician from the time he came here in, I think, 1937 on a riverboat. He decided he'd stay, and so he became a professional musician. Let's say by 38, and he
Hmm.
worked all the way until, I'm thinking it was 76, 77. So his whole career as a musician, and I don't think he ever really understood what a impact he made upon other bass players. I know Junior Husky, who was one of his contemporaries of the time. Junior came in a little later in the late 40s, and was one of the A-team session bass players here for years. Uh, Junior, that was his, it was his idol, was Joe. And going back to the time when Joe first came here and started working with Pee Wee King. There's one picture you had on earlier there, him with Pee Wee King slap riding the bass. Joe would take these amazing solos, yeah, right there. And a lot of those, fortunately, we found things he did with A-Cuff and with Pee Wee were air shots live on the Opry. And he'd play these amazing solos, and in his jazz tunes, it wasn't just the boogie. They were doing, Darktown Strutter's Ball and Four Leaf Clover, and a lot of these other things we see him do later on television. But man, the stuff he was doing when he was in his 20s was really hot, and it was really fast. And so I can't help to think, and I know I've talked to other other players that grew up listening to Joe, and hearing, and they knew who he was. They said, "Oh yeah, man, Zinkin was the best." You didn't have to worry about it when he was on the record or something like that. But I don't he didn't realize that he was a real humble fella. He was humble. He told me when he sold me that bass, he sat there and looked at that old bass. He said, he said, all I've ever had to do is just play this old bass. He said, I've never had to dig a ditch or do anything. He said, just play this old bass. And he got teared up a little bit and about got me, about broke me up. He said, just do one thing. Promise me you'll do one thing. And I said, what's that? He said, just think about me every once in a while when you play this old bass. And I'm like, man, I just about, couldn't take I was like, oh man, you'll make me give this back to you. I can't take your bass you've had since you was a kid. But
Oh,
that was my
that's
introduction into the life of Joe. And I've kind of
unbelievable.
made it, my personal, uh, you know, project to put his name up. Because, Bob Moore sat there one night and told me and Dennis Crouch, he said, Joe's the only guy that could pull a string. When I was a kid, he said he knew how to pull that string. He said these other guys did this and that, but he said Joe was the first guy he saw really, pull the tone out of a bass. And then Lightning was the same way. Lightning would tell you, Joe was the best. He was the greatest. And Billy Lindeman, who was the Opry staff player for 40 years, Billy was Joe's sub on the TV shows. Uh,
Yeah.
in the 60s. Sometimes some of those you'll see a different bass player on there, and most of the time it's Billy. and that's, Joe had a session or something, he'd get Billy, and those guys all worked together. They called each other,
That's
and
so cool. I mean, Joe seems, I mean, from your stories and then everything that I know about him, seems like that he was an amazing, an amazing person. Besides being obviously an amazing bass player. And you told me like he, I mean, he played. No, I mean, he played with Hank Williams as well,
mhm.
and with lots of other amazing musicians.
Mhm.
Um, where did you get all these photos that you sent me?
Man, I've scoured the internet and golly, different places for years. Looking for. I love to see old stage photos like that, studio photos. The unscripted pictures. And I've anytime I see a picture of something like that. Now that picture
Yeah,
right there is from I think that was 1949 or 50. Uh, they took an Opry package show to Germany, and Acuff's band. That's Joe playing the bass, and that's Jimmy Riddle playing the accordion. That's Hank Williams and Audrey Williams, and they backed up Hank there. Joe worked with Acuff until 1957, 57, 58. I can't get a month on it, but and that's when he quit the road in 57, 58, and at the suggestion of Owen Bradley, started taking in studio work, and and then he worked the studios pretty much. I guess until 62, 63, when television uh, started really getting a lot of work here, and he kind of migrated into the television, which luckily that's why we see him on all these shows. Is
that's
he was
great.
he worked himself into the TV era, and
Yeah,
still
there's a
doing it.
bunch of those thanks to you on YouTube, and it's, I don't know, it's just amazing seeing that guy play, and just, I mean, he's, the rock star.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean, I don't know, I just love he's playing, like whatever he was doing, it's just like sounds unbelievable. It's like,
yeah,
I think you posted like 4 or 5 of these, right?
yeah. All of them I could find, and there's more of those, you know.
Oh, there are like
Yeah,
more of him
yeah. I
playing
mean,
solo.
he played those were syndicated television shows. The Bobby Lord Show.
Okay.
Bobby had a daily show here in Nashville, and he had a syndicated show. And the Hall of Fame, the Country Music Hall of Fame, has got, I guess they've got all or that or whoever owns the Grand Ole Opry now. I don't know what ownership of that has changed, and uh, uh, different media companies have owned the rights to those, and I'm just lucky to. A few of them have slipped out here and there. I'll put it that way, and I'm not. I don't look to make any money. I just want the man to be seen.
Yeah,
Education. I'd let somebody learn from this.
it's
And
just
it's unfortunate
it's
to
amazing.
me these museums and places. They collect these great films and these transcriptions from the 40s, and why are you collecting them if you're not going to let nobody hear them? You can go down there and listen to them in a little set of earphones like you had when you were in elementary school. It's like, how can I learn from that? It really that bugs me. That's one reason that somebody has asked me about putting Joe's bass in the museum, and I said, well, I might loan it one day, but he wanted that instrument to be played, and you know, whoever when I'm done with it, somebody else will get it and they take and play it. I don't want a good instrument doesn't need to be in a museum and never be played again.
Yeah.
But
Well, I like that. So cool. So there are more of these like videos like with him
I'm sure
playing
I'm
solo
sure there's.
flat.
I mean, I don't know. I've never been able to look at the master list of those things, but
Uh-huh.
but there those things went from I think 1963 to 1967, 68, something like that.
Oh
They
wow, so there
and
must
I
be,
don't
huh?
know how often he would do them, but those things they just pop up every once. Somebody shows up with the things from time to time. Um,
So
it's
cool. All right, so if
yeah.
anybody is watching this and know about any of the other ones, send an email to
Send
any
them
of us.
out.
Let us know.
Yeah.
Let us know. That's so cool. All right, so you also told me that he played with Elvis, right? There's a
Yep.
session,
Yep.
him like,
He told me that he did a session with Elvis one time, and I've searched quite a bit, and I've never found any proof of that, his discography. But I know Joe's daughter had told me a story that she remembered. He was getting ready to go record with Elvis, and it was, of course, his daughters both being teenagers at the time, they were pretty excited about that. But Joe was not that impressed with Elvis. Um, he was used to going into the studio and in a 3 hour session, you got three, maybe four songs, and let's go to work, get out of here. And I remember he told me, he said that Elvis guy said we got in there, and I think it was like a 10 o'clock session, late at night, and he said he'd want to lay on the couch for a little bit, and then he'd want to do this, and he might play the piano. And he said then he'd want to eat a hamburger, and he said I was in there to work. I wasn't in there. And so his his attitude with Elvis was, it wasn't all that. His work ethic, I guess, wasn't up to Joe's standard. Somewhere there's a picture. I'll have to find it of actually of Elvis and Scotty and Bill sharing the stage with Acuff's band in the 50s, and Joe's playing the bass. He's hidden. He's behind him, their paths crossed in probably 55 or 56. I'll have to find that picture and send it to you. Uh, but yeah, he played with Elvis. He got in, like I said, in about 58. Um, he had gotten into the studio scene by that time.
so when do you think that session with Elvis happened?
I'm gonna say the late 50s or early 60s.
Okay.
Bob Moore did just about all that stuff at that time, and this must have been it must have been a date that Bob already had booked, and Bob has said that in interviews before, that occasionally, when he'd have something booked, he would send it to Joe or somebody, and he usually named Joe. Bob usually said if I couldn't do a session, I'd give it to Joe. And so this must have been a rare occurrence that Bob couldn't do it or was already booked, or I don't know.
So it
But
got to be like very late 50s or 60s, probably
mhm.
most likely. I mean, I think that Bob started playing with Elvis in June of 1958, something like that. I
That
think that
sounds
that's
right. What Heartbreak Hotel and all that was?
I think so. I think that's
Yeah,
June 10th,
yeah.
1958.
I think. Let's see. Oh, I'd have to. You can narrow it down. I think he did one session with Elvis. Bob at least did one session with Elvis in the old RCA when it was at the Methodist Publishing House studio. I think there's pictures of that. Both he and Bill Black were at that session, and then the rest of them were done at RCAB, which was built opened in '57. So I guess he might have done a little bit, even the first sessions maybe at RCA with Elvis, but we'd have to
So
pinpoint
you
that.
think that and Joe did those sessions? I mean, that session with Elvis in Nashville or Memphis?
Nashville, yeah,
Nashville. Okay.
yeah, it was Nashville.
I mean,
But
that makes.
I've never found. I don't know if they didn't record anything or they didn't.
Oh yeah, or
It
they
was
were
all
just
hit.
hanging out,
But they just hanging out and playing. Who knows? He was.
eating
I just
burgers.
know he wasn't very impressed with Elvis, but at that time, Joe was doing a lot with not really so much with it's funny. At the time, you hear and study about the studio session scene in Nashville in those days. It wasn't a whole lot of how good you were. There were a lot of good players here. A lot of it was who you hung out with, who you fished with, who you bowled with, and I know Joe. I'm pretty sure had gotten to meet and become friends with a Columbia record producer named Don Law. Don took over the production of Columbia's countryside or hillbilly records in the 50s when Joe was still working for Roy Acuff. And I know Don was not well liked by Acuff. In fact, he gave up his contract short. He left them hanging. But but Joe obviously had had become pretty good friends with Don Law and Owen Bradley, I guess, because Owen's the one that convinced him to leave the road and start being available for sessions. And I know like Lightning Chance Lightning, he played for different people, but most of what Lightning played for was Capitol, and Capitol's uh, producer at the time, Marvin Hughes. I think Lightning and Marvin were fishing buddies too, or bowling buddies or something. It's kind of odd how that ran. I guess it's still that today. Who you hang out and drink with is who gives you work. But but anyway, that's how Joe got started. He told me in his session work was with Owen, and then it's pretty obvious within a year of him starting that he starts showing up on all these Columbia records that Don Law was producing, which was the main the main part of his work is on Columbia. He Johnny Horton, Lefty Frizzell, Flatten Scruggs. He shows up on there. Yeah, that's a picture of the session where they cut Battle of New Orleans, and that's looking over Joe's back right there in the Quonset hut there in Nashville. And I believe it's the Jordanaires in the background. There's a couple of pictures. Those showed up in some little CD of Johnny Horton a few years ago. I showed those pictures to Harold Bradley. I think Harold was on that session, and Harold dated it pretty quick by where they were standing in the studio. He said, "Oh, this was real early because he could tell by something." And before they built the control room in the Quonset hut, but yeah, that was a neat little find there.
Did Joe tell you anything about any of those sessions? Like, did he talk about anything that was particularly interesting or special that you want to share?
You know, I asked him. I asked him one time. I said, "Joe, what was your favorite studio to cut in?" I do remember asking him that and about microphones and things, and 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 he told me his answer to his favorite studio was downstairs at Bradley's. And to explain that, and I told that to Harold Bradley, and Harold thought that was strange. He said it's strange he would said that, but he knew what he talked. Bradley's studio at the time that the Quonset hut was built onto the back of a house there on 16th Avenue, and the old house, it was just an old 3-story brick house. They had taken the first floor completely out of the house. So when you went in the house, you had to go down the stairs into what was the basement. And it was open all the way up to the ceiling of the first floor. So it would have been 16-foot ceiling. I've seen pictures of that, and Joe said it was so small you had to kind of file in there and get in place. It was a pretty tight little deal in the downstairs at Bradley's, and I guess I guess that's what he's talking about, unless he is comparing the Quonset Hut studio to the newer Columbia studio built in the late '60s. Now, it may be me talking about the Quonset Hut. At that time that I asked him that, I didn't understand the difference in those three studios. You had three studios in the same spot, or built in the same building. They just kept building on studios, but he did the majority of his stuff. He did in that picture right there. That's the Quonset Hut. That was
Got it. And tell me, how did this happen? I mean, this is just amazing.
well, like I said, I bought Joe's old bass and been playing it, and I asked him one time. I was up at his house. I said, Joe, I said, what if I'm playing the Opry one night? I said, why don't I come by and pick you up and take you with me? I said, man, a lot of the guys he had worked with on the Bobby Lord show and all the sessions, at the time, Spider Wilson, who was playing guitar on the Bobby Lord show, he was part of the staff band. And of course, there's Billy Lindeman. He was the staff bass player. Buddy Harmon, who had played on, thousands of sessions throughout from the 50s on up. Harmon was playing staff at the Opry, and I said, man, these guys would love to see you, Joe. They ain't seen you in forever. I've been telling them, that that I have kind of found you, and we've been talking and things, and he said, well, he kind of said, I don't know. He said maybe one day. He didn't answer me direct, and so he did think for a minute. He said, Ray Price. He said, I've not seen Ray since we cut records, and I think the last session he had cut with Price was in '74, and he had noticed in the paper that Ray Price was coming to the. I think he was doing a concert somewhere outside with the symphony or something. I don't remember, but he said, I'd like to see Ray Price again. He said, me and Ray were buddies, and he said, if you never find out where Ray Price is going to be, he said, you call me and let me know. He said, I'll go see Ray Price. And so I said, okay. So I got in touch with Eddie Stubbs, who's one of my close friends at the time, and was an Opry announcer at the time. And I said, Eddie, I said, you gotta do some background work. I said, we've got to know ahead of time when Price is going to be back at the Opry. And I told him, he had helped me find Joe, and he was all involved with that too, and he looked right quick, and he said he'll be here, whatever the date was. He said it was about a month off, and so I called Joe back, and at that time was the battle of the Codaphones, called, left him a message. Said, Joe, look, Ray Price is gonna be at the Grand Ole Opry on such and such a date. If you'd like to go, you let me know. I'll come pick you up. And so a day or two went by, and then I get home one day, and my Codaphone has a message, and it's Joe, and he said, yeah, he said, I'll take you up on that Opry trip. He said, it's going to be me and my wife, my daughter Sandy, my daughter Mary Jo, and her husband and her two children. he started naming off people he was going to bring with him, and I thought, oh man, I've got myself in a pickle here. How am I going to get all these people backstage? And so I called Stubbs and throw it on Eddie and say, man, you got to help me. How are we going to get all these people in? He said, well, I can get, X amount of folks in. And so then I called Linneman and said, Linneman, I said, you got to help me. I said, I'm bringing Zinkin out, but he wants to bring his family. And Billy was like, yeah, we can do that. We can do, you get me a list. And so like I said, it's about a month out and or a few weeks out, and I got everybody's name kind of finalized, and then I don't know how the word got out. I don't know if we spread it out or what, but then Bob found out about it. And Bob wanted to come, and I'm like, well, heck, we're gonna call Bob. Let's call Lightning. Lightning, yeah, Lightning said I'll be there. And I think Mike Bubb was working with Del McCurry that night. He happened to be there, and me and Dennis Crouch are good friends, and I'd let Dennis in. I said, come on, man, you got. I don't remember if Dennis was working or not, but I said, you gotta come out here. And so Dennis showed up, and heck, that night ended up being uh, Don Helms, who had played steel with Hank Williams originally, and then he played with the Wilburn brothers and a lot of session work with Joe and all those guys. Don showed up. Of course, Buddy Harmon was there, and of course Ray Price. Um, and So we get all these people. Here's this whole conglomeration in the backstage of the Opry. And I remember Bob Moore was real. Uh, he was real proud to see Joe again, and they were old friends. And I remember we were walking in the back door, and Price was right there at the door, and Bob and Ray had been close friends too. And he grabs Ray. He said, "Come here, Ray." Of course, Price knew who Ray Price knew who Bob was. He said, "Here's somebody over here you ain't seen in a long time." He said, "I want you to see this guy. He wants to see you." And he said, and Price stuck his hand out and says, "Who is this?" And he said, "This is Joe Zinkin." And Price, man, he drops. He's like, "My God!" He said, "I haven't seen Joe. I've not seen you." He said, You don't look like you're saying." He was an old man by that time, and they had a big time there talking about the old days, and of course he brought him on in, the whole family. They had a ball back there with and Joe showing his kids and his grandkids. Here's little Jimmy Dickens. They run up to each other, hadn't seen each other in years. And then all these old guys that were still playing down there, wanted to see Joe. They hadn't seen him. He kind of been reclusive. And one of the best things was out in the lobby of the Opry House. There was that picture of him riding the bass. It was a bigger than life size picture that they had blown up. And in fact, I took that that was on the wall. It was this huge mural like picture. And his whole family had to go out there and see that picture of him. They had the biggest kick out of that, seeing Grandpa out there when he was a kid. But
So awesome.
But yeah, we had a big night, and everybody got back there and we had all those pictures made with. Yeah, there's a bunch of us, all the bass players, and there's so many different people making pictures. But one of the funniest things was, it's strange. Joe was deaf, I think, from a child on his, let me get it right, on his right side. His right ear he could not hear out of. He could only hear out of his left ear. And of course, in the older age, I'm sure he had a hearing aid in his good ear too. And Bob is just the opposite. He's deaf on his one side of his. And anyway, those guys ended up, Bob and Joe ended up on the stage of the Opry. There's some pews that sat behind the band. You can actually, if you're backstage, you can go sit in these pews and see the back of the band, look out to the audience. And they're sitting over there talking to each other. And both, do what? He's hollering this, and the other one's, this way, because he's got his good ear, and they're almost back there screaming at each other and laughing. They're having a great time. And I don't remember if it was Price. I don't think it was Price. I believe it was little Jimmy Dickens. Was at the microphone, And Dickens did a real nice, gracious. He said, we have in the house tonight the two men that cut, between the two of them, cut the majority of the however many hundreds and thousands of records he had cut. And Joe had been on Jimmy Dickens' first records, and then Bob was in Jimmy Dickens' first road band. So Jimmy had a real good feel for it. And he said we have these guys are sitting right back here. He said Joe Zinkin and Bob Moore, and Joe and them are back there. They've been back there like this and everything. And that spotlight come around on those two guys, and they just lit up. And they stood right up, took a bow. The professional show business come right out. I thought, man, they're not going to hear him out there, but they turned the spotlight on. And I wish somebody got a picture of that. And there's probably film footage of it somewhere. But that was real nice of Dickens to do that. He appreciated those guys, and it was great. It was great seeing Joe out there with his old buddies, and I remember Wilma Lee Cooper came up to him and grabbed him and hugged him, and poor Joe hadn't, he'd been around people since the 70s. He said, "Well, how's Stoney?" That was Wilma Lee's husband, and she said, "Well, Lord, he's been dead, Joe, for 15 years." And he's, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know." but yeah, that was a real treat. I was just glad I could have a hand in putting that together.
I mean, without you, that would not help. It would not happen. So, thank you.
Yeah. It was. Believe me, it was my pleasure. And
I bet. The bass that you showed earlier, is that Zinken bass or some other one?
No, that's my old Stanton. Let me see. I'll get Joe's old bass over here.
All right. Show us that one.
You got to hit a lick on it the other day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is Joe's old German bass, which you can see of it here. It's an old. I've got a little picture of him back here on the back. Let me get the light where it doesn't. He said, "Always think about me when you play." And I said, "Oh yeah, old Joe's always back here." But it's just an old German bass, probably made in the 1880s, 1890s. I keep it strung up with gut strings most of the time.
Are they the same strings that he was using?
Well, now I've got those. In fact, the other day when you were here, I had those strings on. I kind of rotate them off. I don't.
Okay.
I've taken them off and put some other ones on since then, but I keep those put up. But I've got his old strings he had on it when he sold it to me. I've spent a king's ransom on this bass. It was in terrible shape when I got it. It was beat all to pieces. It's got a lot of repaired cracks in it. It's hard to see, I know, in here, but the ribs were in terrible shape. The top, about a quarter of the top has been rebuilt. They had to, we just had to basically, some of it just take out, and Nick Lloyd of Cincinnati actually recarved this piece from here down and added, because the other had just, he'd squirted glue in it and everything else. It was just in terrible shape. But I've had the top, excuse me, rebuilt. And just a few years ago, Randy Hunt here in Nashville, we took the back off. Some of these they call the wings. All that had been ill repaired for so long. And Randy, we fixed the back. The bottom block was busted, and he repaired it. And it's better than it ever has been. I mean, it's probably the best shape the bass has been in 100 years. Anyway,
so cool. Do you know how he got that bass?
He bought his dad got this bass. I can't remember if he said he was 14 or 15 years old, and it had belonged to one of the players that played orchestra music or pop music or something at the time in Evansville, Indiana. Joe's dad was a railroad man, and I guess Joe was wanting to play the bass, and his dad found him this bass from that that orchestra, or that's he called him an orchestra player. So he'd had this bass for since he was a kid.
We talked about that special Zinken technique a little bit. Do you mind like showing Slapstream audience the same thing what you showed me?
Yeah, I'll try. You can do it better than I can. You've learned it good. Uh, I I never got Joe to show me particulars. I'd learned to slap my own way, and it was after Joe was gone that a lot of these videos you start hearing some of these things. And I think he had a slap where he not just took and hit the bass like that. He rolled his hand. He used some type of a roll. And 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 he did some things over the years that's just let's see. Yeah, we still there?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, mine went blank there for a minute, but yeah, but Joe just let's see. Just
All right.
I'm rusty at that stuff, man. I hadn't slapped much in a long time, so I'm kind of rusty. But
You
anyway,
should.
you got
Fun.
something to do with that hand rolling. I know it's a little different what I do, but there's something he had something unique that none of the rest of them had as far as technique.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he was special. And what do you think? What do you say like on which of these videos that you posted and uploaded on YouTube are that technique is the most visible? I'm
Well,
talking about that roll thing.
there's one there's one where he does it's called the classical routine, and it's comedy that he was doing with Acuff's band, and he's playing a yellow bass on there, and he's riding the bass, and in that you can hear him do that roll. I mean, it's just like a drum roll while he's playing. I think you about figured it out, but that's one of them that you can hear it. There's a recording he did with Johnny and Jack called "I Never Can Come Back" or "Never Will Come Back to You," which is the same song as Jesse James, an old standard, and he plays that I call it the drum roll lick in there. He just rolls that slap just smooth as silk. And then the Bobby Lee Trammell thing that was done in what 72, the Mostest Girl. That's mind boggling. I've
It
yeah,
truly is.
there's your classical thing there, and that was probably in I think that's 55 or 56, and he's playing an okay bass there. It belonged to oh, I knew the guy that owned that bass, but Joe helped him pick that bass out at the music store, and Joe would use that bass. But yeah, he had and the guy had a hand on him like a gorilla. I mean, I'm not. He had this huge hand it was, you can see in the video, I've got small hands. Man, Joe had this hand, and his action, my gosh, his action was huge on this base. When I got this base, it had action you drive a truck under, and grooves. This fingerboard is a good kind of a curly ebony, and it had grooves in it half the depth of a string. It was crazy how he played it, but yeah, that video there has got some real good.
He was quite a comedian, huh?
Yeah, he came through in the years where you had to be a funny man. You know, it was show business to those guys, and Joe was a comedian, and that was A-Cuff's band. All of them, they were real entertainment. And in fact, there was somebody told me that Spike Jones, who everybody's familiar back in the 40s, had in the 50s the Spike Jones Orchestra. They said, some people have said that he got that idea after seeing A-Cuff's jug band play. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it very well could be. But
interesting.
But yeah, but they always had something crazy going on. You know, it was all entertainment in those days. And,
absolutely.
But yeah, he does some of that wild drum roll stuff, and Junior Husky, the Daddy Husky, I call him. I had Daddy Husky and Boy Husky. Daddy Husky could do that. He played some, especially the old Rule the Circle album that he did in '71.
Yep.
Junior does a little drum roll stuff like that, and of course he learned it off Joe. That was his hero.
Yeah. Do you think that was the same type of role?
It had to have been pretty close, because I'm sure that's where Junior
he got it from, huh?
He picked it up off Joe, and I'm sure Joe probably showed it to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I didn't show you one the other day. Somebody had mentioned this. There was a guy that used to play with Monroe named Tater Tate, and Tater had an unusual slap, and I think he learned it maybe from George Shuffler, who had worked with the Stanley brothers. I'll show you this. This is crazy, but Tater showed me this years ago, and you actually slap the bass. Now I don't know if Joe could do this or not. Did you get that on there?
No, I lost you for a second. Do you mind showing again?
I moved this darn thing, and it goes off. Yeah. Like that. And they even had a rumba thing. He goes, see. That's some of that vaudeville stuff, I suppose.
Nice. And that's from Zinken?
I think maybe I think George Shuffler that worked with the Stanley brothers. I believe I think Tater got that off of George, and I don't know if George would have got that from Joe or Junior or any of them. But that I've never seen anybody else do it, but Tater Tate that worked with Monroe.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was a crazy little. You don't. I've never seen anybody else do that.
Yeah.
Thanks, I can't do it. I'm out of practice on that stuff.
And someone showed that to you, or you learned it off the records and stuff?
No, Tater Tate showed me that. That. If I think about it, I can't do it. it just something crazy I learned when I was a
Cool
kid.
technique.
But it'll
That's
kill your
awesome.
fingers, man. That's not for the faint at heart.
Oh yeah,
Nothing back against that.
but it sounds cool. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
Who would you say besides Joe Zinken would be your main bass and more specifically slap bass influences?
Well, Joe and of course when I was younger, Jake Tullett, cousin Jake that played for Flat and Scruggs. That was Jake is a wonderful slap player, and he's another one that learned from Joe. I know Jake's son Gary very well, and Jake grew up around Junior and Joe and uh, and I'd say probably coming up when I was a teenager, uh, hearing Jake on that stuff, which of course back then we didn't have YouTube and things. We had a couple of records that where Jake played solos with Earl Scruggs, showpieces, and he'd slap the bass. Little Darling Pal of Mine, that was on one of Flat and Scruggs' big uh, instrumental records, and so Jake was one of my early influences slapping, and still is. I mean, Jake played some stuff behind Flat and Scruggs, that just he. I don't know. My opinion of that, I believe he carried that band in more ways than one. Uh, but then, like early on, before I heard of who Joe was, Jake, and then Junior, we find Junior Husky stuff, especially the Circle album. That was real. That was real important. That Circle album, because you could go through there and see his name, is playing on these tracks, and it kind of put a name with the playing. And I learned a whole lot of bass off of the Circle album that Junior played on.
Those are awesome, like all three of those. And I have a
Yeah.
question for you, since you mentioned the first one. On one of the prints for the vinyl that I had back in the day, it said that another bass player played on it, named Vassar Clemens, and that he.
No, it's Ellis Pageant. Yeah. See, Vassar played the fiddle on that,
Yes. Okay.
and
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and there's a few songs on that
You're correct.
album
Yes.
that
Okay.
are credited to Ellis Pageant, and
Yes.
and
That's a
I,
question.
I I did a little research on that, and I can't find anybody that remembers Ellis Pageant much, uh, but he was a bass player around here in town. Uh, I think there's one. So Reno and Harold, Don Reno and Bill Harold record that Ellis played on. There's a picture of him. Um, and it seems to me, whoever I talked to about that, Charlie Cushman was my good friend. Charlie told me a little bit about what he'd heard of Ellis Pageant. But I think that Ellis was friends with Vassar Clements, and that was his inroad here at the time, was
Yes.
playing either with Vassar or he was one of Vassar's friends or something. Um, I know for a fact that there's a couple of those songs that if you listen to the bass playing, and I'm not putting Ellis Pageant's playing down, but you listen to him and you can tell that's not Junior Husky. Uh, just by the way he turns his notes and way he changes chords. Junior was a very uh, clean, exact player. He didn't fudge things. He knew what he was doing. And there's a couple of those songs on there that they're changing chords and the bass player's not changing chords, and Junior would never have done that. And I think there's one of those that's got a slap break on there that's credited to Ellis Pageant, but
That's what I'm asking. It's
I'm not I'm not
Lonesome
too
Fiddle
sure.
Blues.
I'm not too sure of that. I don't know.
I'm kind of almost, I mean, kind of like, I don't know, 99% positive that was Husky and not
Yeah,
Ellis. But it is credited on for Ellis. And why I mixed it up is because I think that Ellis played with Vassar Clemens on his album Hillbilly Jazz or something like that.
Yeah, he might have.
Yeah.
I've not found much on Ellis, and I don't know. And unfortunately, we're asking the question about 20 years too late, because all those guys, that would have 20 years ago, we'd asked that somebody. Oh yeah, I knew who Ellis Paget was, but I can't find out much about him. But
Okay.
he was obviously a decent player. He wouldn't either that. Now I can check. There's fixing to be a book coming out. John McEwen of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band is putting out a book all about the Circle recordings. His brother, who was William McEwen, or Bill McEwen, that was the producer of all that stuff, they're putting out a book, and I think it's coming out pretty soon. I think it's like a coffee table size book of a lot of the photographs from that session or those sessions. And I'm friends with Chris Husky, who was Junior's grandson. He was his father was Steve, who was Junior's oldest child. And Chris has got all of Junior's notebooks, little date books that he kept track of his sessions, and it's pretty interesting. There's of the sessions that Junior didn't do. I think we've traced it down that there's a couple of sessions that Ellis Paget obviously is on that Junior didn't do, and the reason that Junior didn't do them, he was doing a Connie Smith session at RCA, and I guess Connie Smith came before the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, according to Junior, which rightfully so. I wouldn't. Well, I'll be nice, but Junior took care of his accounts. I'll put it that way, and he had done just about everything Connie Smith ever did. So he was taking care of number one before the next one came. But that's where the reason probably why he was not on those few records or those few recordings was because he was busy at RCA with Connie. So that's
that makes sense. But I'm glad you answered this question about Ellis, because I asked quite a few people, and I've been asking that question since I got that record a long time ago. I was like, who's this guy? And then this sounds like Husky. I can't really see somebody else playing on that level, that good, that I completely don't have a clue who that was.
I know. I went back and listened to some of that stuff not long ago, and there's one. I think there's one on. There's a fiddle tune called "Patty on the Turnpike," and I think that it's credited Ellis playing on that. I think that's the one. But you can listen to that, and you can tell that's not Junior. He's missing. He's missing changes, and sometimes years ago they would let some of that fly. There's a few mistakes. I know there's a recording of Carl Pearl Butler, and Joe hits a bad note in it, and it went on to press. I know there's there's one of Flatt and Scruggs' records in the late '60s, and Bob is playing bass on, and he signs it. He does his. He ends it, and then they repeat the chorus. It's like, whoops. And they let that fly. It came out on the record. It was a boo-boo. But, the average Joe, the average person didn't know. They didn't know if what if the bass player was, messing up or not. But I don't know. Knowing Junior's playing, I can listen. I've developed listening to those guys so much that I can listen to even their straight playing and their tone and how they turn the song, where they went high or low as to who's playing it. I can hear Bob's tone. You can always pick Bob out. Bob had a
absolutely
pretty distinct big airy tone, and Junior had a little darker tone. But but some of that it's definitely not Junior playing on it. But
Yeah.
I don't have any idea of how good of a player Ellis Pageant was. But I've questioned some of that myself. I do.
We talked quite a bit of the older guys and the originators of country bass and slap bass. What about nowadays slap bass players? Are there players that you like, that you respect, that who are the your favorites these days?
Well, yeah, of course we'd have to. You talk about Nashville and upright playing now. You have to talk about Dennis Crouch. Dennis is man. He had the big soundtrack of the Walk the Line a few years ago and did a stellar job in that. And of course all his work with uh, um, the producer out there in California. I can't call his name right now. I've drawn a blank. Anyway, they did the old brother stuff and all that. That producer. And so Dennis is, that's led Dennis into a lot of good recordings and projects. And man, Dennis is top shelf. Man, he takes a back seat to none of them. He's a great player. And there's other guys around town here that they're, there's a whole new crop of new guys that I see around town playing. Some of the places Station Inn and places I used to play. That a lot of them I don't know. I've run different set of circles since then, and our paths don't cross as much downtown. I don't go down there much anymore. But definitely Dennis and for a long time Dave Rowe was when I was working downtown. Dave played a lot of gigs downtown on the upright. He played a lot of rockabilly. Dave was a great slap rockabilly player. God, he'd play those for our gigs, down there at a time, no break and inhuman. He'd sit down there and slap all night. I couldn't imagine, even back when I was playing all the time, playing that hard that much. He played with it. Was it Harry Fontana? Was that the guy I think that was here at the time? And well, those guys they rocked it hard. But yeah, there's a whole new crop every few years of guys here in town. There's not as many. You go downtown, you don't see upright basses in every club anymore. It's become so commercialized. But those guys here in town and yourself, you're playing and who's the guy in France that plays left-handed?
Nicolas Duboucher.
I'm a big fan of his, man. He's got it happening.
He's
Man.
excellent.
That guy, he's really got it going on. He play that. He plays the melodies and stuff a lot like Joe did. I'd love to meet that cat one day.
I love Nicolas.
Yeah,
Friend of
yeah.
What would you say are the most essential slap bass recordings, by your opinion?
Well, the stuff of the circle records, and that's a good step into that. Nowadays you can get online and find anything. The stuff that Jake Tulloch did with Flat and Scruggs, those songs in the bluegrass vein. Let's see what else. The stuff that Joe did so obscure, like you say, you can dig into it now thanks to YouTube. But the stuff that Joe slapped on, and I try to put some of that stuff up. Some of those radio shots he did with different people, and then with that stuff he did with Johnny and Jack that never could come back to you, and things like that. And of course, the more mainstream things that came out. Like I say, I go back into more of the rockabilly in the '50s and stuff like that. Stuff still inspires me. I got to go do a record one time in Memphis with I think it was what was left of the guys that had recorded with Sun. And was it Mac? I can't remember their names. A guy named Mac was one of them, and there's about three of the guys, and then uh, Carl Perkins' son was playing, and I got to go and cut a record with those guys, and I can't remember these. This has been a long time ago. WS Holland, Fluke Holland got me. He played drums with Cash, got me in on that. But that was fun, going and playing the slap style of Carl Perkins's brother, who played that old single slap stuff, and that stuff still inspires me. It had its own life of its own style.
Um, One thing that I like asking all my guests is the names of all these different slap based techniques. Like, are you using this like a single slap, double slap, triple slap type of thing, or you're using something else, some other
Yeah,
name?
I know it gets kind of different. People call it different things.
Yeah.
I always called a single slap just I always called that single slap. Uh, some people I don't, but like we talk Carl Perkins stuff. They just I always just called that single slap, and they did some of that even. I guess that's a true single slap where you only pluck the string, but then you hit it again. I guess that's a true double slap. I don't, and then is that a triple? I don't know. I know it's kind of it's kind
Well,
of confusing. I don't know.
I'm trying, and I will make it like more unified. I'm just like wanna give a chance everyone that knows about it, like to share their knowledge and then the way they see these things. I agree with you about single slap and that stuff.
Yeah.
So what are the other slap patterns that you use or that know that other people use, and then the names for those, what would they be?
Well, kind of, I guess, what little bit of teaching I've done with newer players. Everybody wants to call, they want to call that double slap, and so that always comes to mind, even though maybe that's really something else. But a lot of the things, the quadruplets and things like that, um, I don't play enough to incorporate a lot of that into my play, and I can do some of that, and some of it I really don't know what it's called. It's stuff I've learned off of Joe. That kind of stuff. I don't know what you call it. It's just I stole it off of Zinkin. That's
Yep.
that's all I know. Uh, and I'll use some of that, even playing behind um, some guys. And uh, there's another. Let's see, there's a slap that Jake used behind Flat and Scruggs, and it was kind of that same thing that Joe.
And do you mind like lowering your camera a
Yeah,
little bit so I can
yeah,
see your right hand?
yeah. Let's see if it'll stay on. It wants to turn off when it does it, but 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 there's some radio shots of Jake playing behind Flat and Scruggs, and he's doing something like that. Jake was a very very good player and a good slapper. He had some unusual things, and uh, I'll throw some of that in there. I'm not one to slap the whole time through a song. Very seldom. I'll just use it in and out. Just to flavor things up. There's a few songs that a couple of guys I played with that a little more a rockabilly song or something. It tends to want to slap all the way through, but but or of course a bass break.
So that's my that would be my next question. So since you played with lots of band leaders, did you ever have like anyone telling you, "Hey, can you play less slap or can you play more slap?" and stuff like that? Or like, "Oh, never play slap in bluegrass. That's a no," and stuff like that.
Well, I never really had nobody tell me uh, not to slap, but I had learned early on, like Bill Monroe was one of the first guys that you hear about people playing with Bill. They say, "Man, don't slap. Bill doesn't like much of that." But yet, if he plays a few of the songs, he did have a bass break in it, and he would give the man playing a break to take a solo. Uh, I I always just tried to use slap. Uh, I think somebody called it just flavoring a little bit, to if the song needed a little something like that. Now I did Jimmy Martin, of course. Jimmy was one of those that is notoriously known to be extremely hard to work for. You count the stars in the skies don't equal the amount of people that Jimmy Martin has employed at one time or another. He couldn't get along with people, but Jimmy was he had an unusual way of expressing himself. He was a very simple person, and at the same time, I used to call Jimmy almost a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He was in some respects borderline idiot at times when he'd get to drinking, and other times you talk about music with Jimmy, and he was almost a, a what would be a scholar. I mean, he could think of things and amazing what he could hear in music. Uh, but sometimes, he was, like I said, it depended on what day he was this or that. But I know one of the things that Jimmy taught me. One of the things he pointed out to me in playing like bluegrass music is you get to the end of the line, and Jimmy liked to play a lot of rhythm guitar with runs, bass runs on the guitar. And his simple way explained, he said, "Now look," he said, "if I'm running that bass run in on the guitar, you play straight." He said, "But now if I get to the end of the line and I'm not going to run a bass line, then you walk it in." He said, "That way it keeps us from walking over each other, but it yet keeps the lines at the end of the." And that was some real good advice from a man that really knew music, but had just about zero comprehension of how to explain it to somebody. But he was right on with that.
What would be something that you would recommend for other bass players, like to practice on a daily basis?
Well, that's in slapping. I always get asked this by people that are younger, and I say slap is for entertainment purpose. It's a little extra. When you're first learning to play, I tell people to concentrate on the meat and the potatoes first. Get you a song and learn it. I learned so much from listening to records. Even like when I was playing bluegrass, some of the learning to play bluegrass, some of the stuff that I would listen to a Flat and Scruggs. Come to find out, some of that what I was listening to was Junior Husky playing with them. He did a lot of their sessions. And some of it was Jake. But concentrate on learning the style of the playing first, then add the slap to it for show purposes. I feel there's too many people that take up the bass and they just want to sit there and do that and play the whole song, and I think that really distracts from the song, and I think too many times the bass is looked upon as the easiest thing to learn to play. Let's just give this to, oh, what's his name? Anybody can play the bass, and a lot of people don't take it seriously and learn the techniques and the differences of. Bob Moore is one that showed me left hand technique. I had learned that from my first band director when he said, "You use these two fingers together," and I don't know what the official name of that, left hand technique where you use those two together, and you don't never you don't most bluegrass people you see, even Joe had terrible left hand technique. He played like this with his thumb around, he did like this all the time. And Bob was the one that straightened me out. He said, always keep your fingers pointed at your throat, like that right there. He said that'll keep you. And I don't know. I'm sure there's a technique that's called in the classical or jazz world, but stuff like that. When people try to show you a technique or show you, another thing that Bob showed us, is which is bass is how to pull the string, and it's true. You can pull the strings different ways and get different qualities of tone out of it. It's crazy. I like to see some of the old jazz videos and the big band guys that you see those they're fanning the bass like that, and they're playing with their thumb. That I think Joe could play this way, and Benny Martin, the fiddle player, showed me. And that's how the guys that played the drum attachment. But you see some of those old jazz guys, doing all that kind of stuff, and you study that a little bit and try some of it. There's some merit in the different kind of sounds you can get out of the bass. But that anybody that's learning, I always try to convince them to learn different things. You never stop learning. Learn the different
absolutely.
styles. Yeah.
There's you mentioned kind of like a 3-finger technique, but did I see it correctly that you're using this finger to press and this one to help, or?
Yeah. That's I don't know what that. Use these two together.
Oh wow. Okay.
Use these two together and this one and these. You never used this one by itself or this one by itself.
Oh, interesting.
My old band director, that was, like I said, he was a bass player, and whatever technique he learned to play in school was that right there.
Interesting. I mean, most common would be that these two go together, and then 1, 2, and then these two together.
I remember very plainly. He would sit there. He'd say, "Do that right there." And most people, you try to do that, it's hard to do. And he said, "You sit there." He said, "When you're anywhere, you sit there and practice using those fingers together." And and I know now, like Bob and some of the other guys, they use. And since then, I've changed a little bit, but I still do keep my the advice that Bob, always keep your fingers pointed at your throat. That keeps your left hand in position good.
Got it.
And it's so much easier to play with good position. And,
absolutely.
And another thing, even if you're playing, I don't care if you're playing bluegrass or you're playing jug band music, you learn good techniques, it'll help you. And the other thing was learning to have your bass brought up to where your arm is comfortable instead of being bent over, or some guys play it way too high, I think. But where your arm is naturally, bend it down, where your arm is naturally going to lay, instead of having to reach down or reaching up, where your arm is, that's where you should move your bass up or down to meet that. I think that's important too, to help develop good technique.
What would you say that what would you say that would be your advice for also younger people, how to get a gig, like people that want to meet musicians, they want to go on tour, or like become studio musicians, or any of those paths like these days? I mean, I know that things changed a lot I mean, in last 10, 20 years. I mean, even last 5 years. But what would be your recommendation?
Just playing a lot. Concentrate on your technique and your understanding of the music you're going to play. Um, for instance, a few years ago when we started the Music City Doughboys, which was more of a Western swing band, borderline hillbilly jazz, and we played some, you know, some big band songs and not your typical. And it was a curve for me. I had to sit down and learn uh, a different way of approaching songs than what I had done playing a country shuffle or playing a bluegrass song. So somebody coming up, you know, if you're gonna take a gig or want to do a gig, a certain kind of song, that plays what type of music they're going to play. Study that and be familiar with it. Familiarize yourself with what you're fixing to play, and that would be, another thing is getting around other musicians and just learning from it. Of course, it's so much harder now. It's in the days of it's not as much live music out there where people are approachable. But that'd be my main two suggestions.
As far as your gear goes, like how many bases do you have?
Oh, let's see. So two, one, two, three, four, six. I've got about seven of them. Don't tell my wife that. But no kidding. I've got four main basses. I've got Joe's bass that I will play. I'll still take it to sessions play. I've got my old American Standard that it was my road bass for years that's my main gig bass. I've got another bass that is just like Joe's bass. It was probably made in the same shop. It's uncanny to find, how it is to find two basses exactly alike. Um, and I played it for a number of years out. It's a carved bass. It was a good gig bass. It record pretty good too. Um, and then I've got an old flatback check bass that I record with. It's probably my best studio bass. I don't take it out. I don't take it out and gig with it. It's pretty fragile. Um, and then I've got some other basses. A good friend of mine has started a kind of a little side gig. We're calling it the Nashville Travel Bass, and we're taking vintage basses, K bass, mainly right now K's and American Standards, and that are vintage, good played in, decent sounding basses, and we've come up with a removable neck system where you can remove the neck and put it all in a case and fly with it, and we're working on that right now. We're still trying to get the case. That's the deal, is getting a case that's light enough, that's still sturdy enough to fly these bases, and we're gonna try to get it in development to rent them. Start out just by renting the bases to people where they need one. They don't have to go buy one.
When people want to reach you for that, like what is the best way to where should they find you?
Right now, probably just personally on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook. Well, I don't think we've got a website up yet, but it'd be Nashville Travel Base
All right.
is what we're going to call that. I think you do a search of that, you might come up with something. Myself or Wes Horton. But we're like I said, we've got one base finished that we're just trying to iron out the details of. For instance, we're going to try to have one bass strung with spiral chords, and then maybe
Okay.
one bass, if somebody wants Xyrexes, we're going to try to have a little bit of a selection, as to what the individual wants.
Different ones, yeah.
And
So
so,
you mentioned strings. So what are your favorite strings, and what kind of strings do you usually have on your own basses?
Usually for or forever, I've used gut strings. I started on guts and I can't get off of guts. It's gotten so hard to get good ones. They're so expensive. Uh, for years, I clamored over eBay and Craigslist and all these places, and I would buy new old stock gut strings. And I've got a cabinet full of new ones, old ones, used ones, recycled ones. Like I said, even Joe's strings that he had on this bass, I put them in a Ziploc bag and recently got them out and went and played a session with them. I just on the G and the D. I can't get away the gut. Those were old labella strings. Um, I still like to have a wrapped A and a wrapped E gut string with the silver plated copper. That's what they've been for years in recording because I don't know even with the wound strings, those strings seem to have an attack, a little high frequency attack that I cannot find in any other string. Uh, now gig around town, I'm using. I think with these are some of these what they call red diamonds that Gamut's got out now that are wound with filament, kind of like the old golden spirals. I've got some of those. They're decent. My gut strings I use are Gamut's. I order. I think what I get from him is a heavy G and a medium D. I like the G's a little heavier than what most people. Uh, and then the Eva slaps for an A and an E gigging around town. They're okay. Uh, I have just recently uh, been contacted by is it Aquila out of Italy, and he's making a new golden spiral, which is a gut with a Tinex wrap. Which those are that's pretty exciting because when you're playing guts around here in the South in the summertime, you can ruin a set. You get a hot August evening outside playing a gig, you tear a set of guts up. So somebody coming back out with a wrap string is pretty exciting, and I think he's even working on a synthetic version of that doesn't even have gut in it, so it'll be even cheaper than a gut string. Well, he's supposed to send me some samples to try out. I sent him a package of a whole package of old golden spirals that I had that had come apart, where he can study them and help him figure out what he wants to do. But yeah, I've tried some of the innovations, and some of those they're okay. I can't get the attack out of the string that I can a gut. I've got some that are I don't know what these are called. Gut alike. They sent me some strings that are, I think they're glorified weed eater strings. When I was a kid, I used to use weed eaters. That was handy. But these are some type of nylon filament, and then they've scored them where they're like the winding of a gut, and they're okay. I ended up taking sandpaper and sanding the score out of them where they'd be smoother. They were too rough, but they're for a nylon type string. The gut alike. I think they're out of Germany. Uh, they're G and D. I'm liking that right now, but that that's about it on the string side of things.
And amps, pickups.
Amps.
What else do you use?
I've for years I used the old GK 150. What was that? A 12-inch speaker. But I've used that for years. That little GK on the road. A couple years back, I did upgrade to a is it GK MB 800, I think, or 500. It's the size of a car radio used to be. It's got 3 tubes in the preamp. That's what I mainly use that, and I've got an old Ashdown 210 cabinet that I've had for 25 years or so. I like 10s better than 15s. 15s feed back on me, but that old 210 cabinet and that newer GK amp have been my go-to for a long time. And the little, what is it? I think MB 150 they called it, the little compact GK amp. They've made that for years and years. I still like that. Pickup wise, I use one side of an Underwood. Depends on the bass. Some basses like the treble side, and some basses like the bass side. But I'll drop one side of the Underwood out. I find that both sides of the Underwood pickup together are like having two mics out of phase. They cancel each other out. You lose a lot of punch with both sides. So I keep a Underwood usually on and a Realist. I like Realists sound better, I think, on carved basses, and the Underwoods seem to sound a little better on a plywood bass. But I kind of let the room decide that. Different rooms, I'll plug in one and play, sound check. With one, I'll switch it over and see. It just certain rooms lend themselves to certain pickups, I think.
Do you play with the bow?
With what?
With the bow?
No.
No.
I own one, but I don't play much with it. No, I don't. I've never. In fact, I've got one up there. Joe gave me. Joe had a bow, nice. And I think years ago, some of those guys at the end of the song, if it called for it, they grab a bow and
okay,
hit
so
the last note.
Yeah.
But I've never.
Was he playing with the bow at all? Do you know?
Not that I've all I've seen of people. Now there's one song that Joe cut with Lefty Frizzell, and it's something about a riverboat, and I think he's playing the bass with a bow. He's going whoop whoop whoop, like a tube. Sounds like a tuba, and I think, and there's some pictures from the Quonset Hut studio. I know there's one. I think there's one of Bob. And you see laying right up on the divider right in front of the bass, you see a couple of bass bows laying there. So they had them, if nothing else, they had them for those last notes, or if it was a song that they might be using a string section, they might have overdubbed a bass part. I'm not sure, but
okay.
But I've never. I respect those those old cats in the 20s that played that stuff with the. But man, I love hearing a bass.
Original jazz guys. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's really, really neat.
What is your favorite way to record the bass, upright bass?
I'll show it to you. It's let me get it that way. That right there is one of them. That's an RCA 44B. Man, that's my go-to mic. That or a Western Electric 639, what they call a bird cage. I've been using a 639 a little more in the last few years, just out of curiosity, and it's got a little more air behind it. 44 is a little darker sounding, but I mean that goes back to my thing as a kid. I always wanted to do things exactly like people before me, and Junior and Joe and them guys. That's what they used. Picture evidence they used 44s or 639s, and that's what I'm striving for is the same kind of tone that those.
Where
guys.
do you usually place the microphone?
Usually in front of the treble side F hole.
Okay.
Just off, out about even with the bridge. Mm-hmm. I'd like to try. I've noticed in the last few years, I've studied some of the pictures that Bob used to like to record with the mic right in front of the bridge instead of off to the side. And Bob got he got a different tone, but then Bob was playing an Italian bass too, so that thing would have sounded good, probably with a 57 stuck in front of it. But yeah, just off to the side in front of the F hole, not too close. These mics, I think, sound better when you get a little air between them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So those are. It seemed the most interesting and to go places for the microphone in front of the upright bass.
I,
And
I
thanks a lot
will
for
sometimes.
showing that
I need to
RTA.
add. I need to add. Sometimes we will, when I'm micing and recording, I will use something else, and it could be just anything up high as well, just in case it's too dark and we want to get a little more string. I do need to clarify that. We'll just throw some type of a condenser mic or something
Mhm.
on the, this high, just in case the main mic is a little too dark. I,
Got it.
I don't like the string noise that you hear people these days. I know a lot of bluegrass stuff. You hear this clicking noise that's coming off their fingers. It's
Hmm.
because their action is so low, and I'm not a
Ah.
fan of that. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll run my action high, but
Like
I,
the old
I'm
cats.
I like it. I like that old big sound.
Of course. We all do. That's how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
um, I have one more question, but before I ask you that, like, I would like to ask you to play something, and then also, like, is there anything else that you would like to mention that I might have missed or forgot to ask you? Something that you think it's important?
No, I tell you, I really appreciate you taking on the project and the work that you do on here with all the modern bass players and I know Dennis has been on here with you before and the country bass players and then you take the time to go and find the older jazz players and the research you've done. It's a great job. You
Ah,
good
thank you.
service you've done here.
Thanks so much.
It's good.
Like, my audience is all the guys that I have had as guests.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
like a niche thing, but I'm like, somebody got to do it. Like,
yeah,
all
yeah.
right, all right. But I would love to hear you play a little bit. So, like a solo or like something that includes slap or whatever you feel like it. You did little beats and pieces, and I enjoy your playing. So if you can do that for the end, that would be awesome.
Well, we'll try a little. I don't know. Let's see what I can come up with here uh, on Joe's old bass here. Let's see. Oh, let me think of something. Let's see. There you go.
All right.
Little
All
lady
right.
of Spain.
Awesome. You should play more slap. You should play.
I'm so man. I'm so out of practice. I don't get to do it enough anymore.
I think we all are after this whole pandemic craziness.
Yeah.
It is what it is. We're getting out of it. Um, all right. So my last question that I always like asking is, like, what inspired you to still do what you do, to still play, to still maybe not as often as before, but like still play gigs, still go on recordings, and do all this stuff that you do for upright bass.
Well, just the pure enjoyment of it. I love playing bass, and I'm you know I'm never inspired to be a singer or a lead guitar player or like my wife's a steel player. That thing is like flying a helicopter. It's out of my league. But I just truly enjoy my part to try to help and make a band sound good. With tone, adding a solid uh, bass, rock bottom bass to everything, and it's nothing like it. It's great uh, enjoyment comes out of playing good music with people, and that's my main thing now. I'm past the point of wanting to go out and make a lot of money with it. Some of these gigs we play around, we don't make much money at it. I'm not making a living at it no more. But it's just the pure enjoyment, and it just seems like it's so much more fun when you're playing because you want to than I remember the days when you had to climb on that bus and go play, to put the food on the table, and it wasn't as much fun, but it's so much more fun now just to play, kind of play what you want to play, and just the satisfaction that comes from it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks a lot for being a part of the 70th episode of the
Yeah,
Slapstream. And thanks a lot for, now officially for the letting me play Joe Zinkan's bass and,
yeah.
hanging out at your barbershop. I had a blast. The whole Nashville trip was awesome. And I hope to be back in your town sometime soon.
Well, we'd love to have you, and you make sure you call us. And thank you again for your hard dedicated work you do on here.
Will do. Thanks so much. All the
All
best.
right.
And yeah, I'm sure that our paths gonna cross again sometime in the near
Uh,
future.
I hope so, buddy.
All right.
All right. Thank you, George.
Thank you. All right. That was the 70th episode of the Slapstream with Djordje live from Slapsville. That was Kent Blanton. Uh, a lot of amazing stories, and like I think this is firsthand as you can get, like with the old cats, all the country and bluegrass bass players. So, which is awesome. I really enjoyed hanging out with Kent a couple weeks ago, and I knew that you would enjoy it too. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more slap based videos, more slap based stories, more cool experiences from cool players. I would love to feature everyone that has something to say. So if you have any suggestions, make sure to either shoot me an email at contact@artofslapbase.com or post a comment under any of these videos. And occasionally I check that out and then dig out some cool guy, to feature. Now we're getting, 70 episodes. It's kind of a lot for slap bass, and it's hours and hours of knowledge. So I hope you guys seen most of it at least, and don't watch. My recommendation would be don't watch just country if you're into country. Don't watch just jazz if you're into jazz, or what rockabilly if you're rockabilly. Watch everything. There's like all these people, all these great players had uh often same influences, and you can learn from all of them. But this show is not about me, so I don't want to talk too much. But I do want to remind you to subscribe. Do want to tell you that I really appreciate all the people that sign up for my Patreon. If you haven't, check it out. All these links are in the description of this video. If you want to support the Slapstream, check out Venmo and PayPal also under, and follow me. Follow Art of Slap Bass, and and check out this shirt. So let me see how I can do this. Oh, it's weird. Okay, but there you go. So if you like slap bass, if you like Slapstream, if you like to support my work, get the t-shirt. Also in the description of this video is the link. And don't forget, never fret. Slide it in smooth and keep it in the groove. I'll see you maybe next Saturday, or maybe a little later than that, but I'll see you soon. Thanks.